presidential candidate and U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders has created an education plan that blames a lack of funding for the problems in American education. Is there truth to this? Let's look at just facts. According to Sanders, in America today, most school districts are funded out of local property tax revenue, resulting in unconscionable inequalities. While this was true more than half a century ago, data from the U.S. Department of Education shows that nowadays, only 36.4% of all public school revenues come from local property taxes. This is because state governments have paid a growing share of the education expenses of low-income school districts in order to equalize their funding with higher-income districts. Consequently, schools with high portions of non-white students have paid about the same amount per student as districts with mostly white students since the early 1970s. This is confirmed through studies conducted by the left-leaning Urban Institute, the U.S. Department of Education, PhD economist Derek Neal from the University of Chicago, and the Conservative Heritage Foundation. Likewise, Sanders blames lack of funding for the low academic performance of K-12 students in the United States compared to other developed nations. He says that we desperately need to spend more money to make our public education system the best in the industrialized world, not one of the poorest. The truth is that the U.S. public schools are among the richest in the world, ranking 4th among 33 developed nations in spending per K-12 student. On average, the U.S. spends 35% more per public school student than other developed nations. Importantly, U.S. fourth graders rank in the top 30% of nations for both reading and math, which shows that they are not lacking in ability. However, by the age of 15, they drop to the bottom 50% in reading and plummet to the bottom 20% in math. These facts refute Sanders' assertions that U.S. students cannot compete with other nations without greater spending and universal child care and preschool, which he wants taxpayers to provide to all children 6 weeks old through kindergarten. Continuing his push for more spending, Sanders says over the past decade, states all over America have made savage cuts to education. Yet data from the U.S. Department of Education shows that average inflation-adjusted spending per public school student is actually near an all-time high. The latest data, which is from 2016, shows spending per student that is 2% below its peak in 2009. By cherry-picking this baseline of exactly 10 years ago, Sanders conceals multiplicative growth in education spending, which grew by 24% over the prior decade, 3.8 times since 1960, and more than 22 times since 1919. And virtually all states have maintained or increased their inflation-adjusted education spending per student over the past generation, most of them by more than 30%. But due to the rhetoric of Sanders and others, many voters are grossly misinformed about education spending. In a 2018 scientific survey, 57% of voters, including 69% of Democrats and 46% of Republicans, said they think public schools spend an average of less than $150,000 per classroom per year. It's actually $332,000, not including the costs of state government administration, unfunded pension liabilities, and non-pension post-employment benefits like health care. In other words, more than half of voters think that public schools spend less than half of what they actually spend per classroom. Sanders declares that a child's education should not and cannot depend on their zip code. But his plan entrenches this situation by denying poor parents the opportunity to choose the best schools for their children. Under the current status quo, the quality of students' education is often determined by their parents' income. This is because wealthy parents can afford to send their children to private schools and live in neighborhoods with the best public schools. Such options narrow as income declines, and the children of poor families, who are often people of color, have few choices. Hence, they typically attend schools with the poorest math and reading scores, the worst discipline problems, and the highest levels of violence. Sanders is strongly opposed to this option. He says that private and charter schools are led by unaccountable private bodies, and their growth has drained funding from the public school system. These are common teachers' union talking points, but facts show otherwise. In reality, private and charter schools are subject to the most direct form of accountability to students and parents. With school choice, if a parent is unhappy with a school, they have the ability to send their children elsewhere. This makes every school accountable to every parent. Public schools, on the other hand, are accountable to politicians. If parents are unsatisfied with a school, they're stuck with it unless they can overturn the political order in their community. This changes with school choice because it empowers every parent to make what they consider to be the best choices for their children. And contrary to Sanders' narrative that school choice harms public schools, at least 21 high-quality studies have been performed on the academic outcomes of students in public schools that are subject to school choice programs. All but one found neutral to positive results, and none found negative results. Parental choice also boosts the per-student funding of public schools because they no longer educate the students who move to private schools. Since private schools spend an average of 47% less per student than public schools, this leaves additional funding for public school students. These savings can also be used to reduce taxes. Sanders neglects to mention the main group that actually loses money under school choice: teachers' unions, which collect fewer dues because private schools are less unionized than public ones. Democratic politicians, political action committees, and so forth also take a financial hit because they've received more than $250 million in reported donations from the two largest teachers' unions since 1990. Furthermore, unions give many unreported donations to Democratic Party causes. Sanders also calls for more government spending on school meals. Even though 39% of U.S. students receive federally subsidized free or reduced-price lunches each school day, Sanders says that in America today, 1 in every 6 kids goes hungry. This deceitful statistic exaggerates the actual hunger rate by more than 100 times. Per the latest data from the USDA, less than 1/5 of 1% of households with children have any child who experiences hunger on an average day. People who allege that child hunger is far more common than that often falsely equate the term food insecurity with hunger. As the USDA explains, low food security means reports of reduced quality, variety, or desirability of diet, but little or no indication of reduced food intake. In short, food insecure doesn't mean hungry, yet Sanders and many others conflate these terms. To summarize, Bernie Sanders insists that one of the core problems of the U.S. education system is underfunding. However, his attempts to support this view are misleading or completely unhinged from reality. This includes his claims about funding inequalities, international comparisons, historical school spending, parental choice, and hunger. These farces have critical implications because they can lead people to make misinformed decisions that harm children by depriving them of a quality education, fleece taxpayers by making them pay more for less, and divert attention away from genuine problems. I'm Amanda Reed Sheik, here with Just Facts. For thorough documentation of every fact in this video and more facts about this issue, read the article "Bernie Sanders' Education Plan is Rife with Deceit" at justfacts.com.